Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the ERAP Town Hall. Today, we are going to be talking with tenants, the publics, and the landlord. And this is obviously facilitated by the Wyoming Department of Family Services. We're going to introduce the team, and then we'll talk about the agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and start out. My name is Carla McLaren, and I am the homelessness supervisor for the Department of Family Services, and I am part of the ERAP team. So Tina, would you like to go next?
Hi, my name is Tina Packard, and I am one of the ERAP program managers.
Ashley?
And I'm Ashley DeGrazio. I am the other ERAP program manager. Corinne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yes, welcome everyone. My name is Corinne Livers. I am the Economic Security Programs Administrator for the department. The ERAP program falls under my purview, and so this is the team that has been working very hard on this program for the duration of this grant.
All right, thank you, team. Before we begin the presentation, I just have some housekeeping items that I want to talk with everyone about. We have everybody on mute. This helps us really concentrate on the presentation and get rid of all that background noise that some of us may have. And I am going to be going through the presentation, and that's going to go over the overview of the program changes. And during that time, we're going to ask you to hold your questions. After this presentation, there is going to be a time where we're going to get to your questions and answer them, but we're going to just wait till the end and we can all have a group discussion. So we would ask that we do that. Next slide. Okay, before we begin, let's talk about what does ERAP look like right now. So what ERAP looks like right now is that we've helped 13,896 individuals. We have spent $66 million on the ERAP program. And the average assistance that we pay is $4,479. And the breakdown for those payments is we have spent $51 million to our landlords. We've paid out $11 million to our households, $3.8 million in our utilities. And also part of this program, we have done some moving expenses. So we've paid $27,000 in moving expenses. What we're looking at right now is at the current spending pattern of almost $16 million per month. We expect to exhaust our rental and utility assistance funds next spring. We're thinking possibly March, but give and take, we're constantly reviewing the program. But at the rate we're spending, it's looking like spring, we will exhaust our funds. Next slide, please. So let's talk about these changes. Some of you may have already heard a little bit about them. Maybe this is brand new and you haven't. So the program's going to be implementing the following policy changes. So what this looks like is no new is the key word, applications will be accepted after 11:59 on November 10th, 2022. This change only impacts households that have never received ERAP. It's not those that are in the system, it's those that have never got ERAP. No new letters of intent applications will be accepted after 11:59 on November 10th, 2022. The LOIs opened ERAP to Wyoming households that were homeless or without a current residence under a lease and a rental agreement. So that is what we use those LOIs for. After the 10th, that you cannot apply for a new one. So if an applicant has changed residence after November 10th, you will no longer be eligible for ERAP assistance. And I want to talk about that one really quick. So let's say you've been getting assistance. Let's say you've been getting ERAP assistance for, let's say, 6 months. Then you move to a new address. By moving to a new address, that requires a new application to be submitted. And because we are not accepting new applications after the 10th, you will no longer be eligible for ERAP. So the changes, let's remind ourselves that the changes will only impact individuals who have not previously received ERAP. As funding allows, the program will continue to fund extension requests for enrolled and eligible households. Next slide. Okay, first-time applicants. You've never received assistance and you're going to apply. So before November 10th, households applying for ERAP for the first time will be allowed to go through the eligibility process. Payment is going to be dependent on if you get approved eligibility, you're eligible for the program, and there is funding available. That is for the first time user. So nothing, if before November 10th, you or you know someone that has never received ERAP, they may submit an application. Those that have applied for assistance prior to the November 10th deadline will be able to apply for extensions if needed. Extensions are not considered a new application, and we're going to continue to review those extensions, and as long as the individual meets eligibility and funding is available, those extensions will be approved. And I also want to note that we wanted to put in here that applications, new applications right now, it can take up to 40 days to get approval. But remember, if you get your application in before the November 10th, you meet eligibility and funding's available, you will receive ERAP assistance. Next slide, please. Let's talk about the letters of intent. So an approved letter of intent shows prospective landlords that the applicant is eligible for a security deposit, first 3 months of rent, and potential additional rental assistance up to 18 months. So the letter of intent process is not going to change. We are just not going to accept new ones after the 10th. So once you get that LOI, you apply for that. Once the lease agreement is signed and uploaded to the application portal, the payment process begins. As long as funding is available and the tenant remains eligible, the household can apply for extensions. So what that is saying to all of us, and a message that we want to send out, is don't wait to secure a lease agreement. Funding is limited. So those that have LOIs right now or are going to apply for them, we've got to get it done before November 10th. If an applicant has already applied for an LOI prior to the November 10th deadline, you get one. The LOI is going to remain valid from 90 days from the time it was issued. So As long as we have funding available, we're going to continue to honor those LOIs. If housing has not been secured by the time the 90 days is up, that LOI will expire, and or if there is no funding available. So let's say you applied for an LOI, it's 70 days, but our ERAP program has exhausted all their funds. Obviously, you will not get ERAP assistance. That is the letter of intent. So let's go to the next slide. Extensions. So let's talk about how these extension requests for rent are going to work. As we mentioned in a prior slide, that we're going to continue to honor these as long as the person is eligible and there's funding available. So extensions, they do not require a new application. The tenant is already in the system. So ERAP uses the previous application history to redetermine eligibility. So depending on the documents used in the initial applications, new pay stubs or attestations may be required. So there may be some additional requirements, but as long as you remain eligible, the funding's available, you'll get that. So for households that have already received ERAP funds before November 10th, applicants can extend for up to 3 months at a time. So keep those extensions coming, and they'll continue to be approved as long as eligibility and funding is available. Extension cases are going to be accepted after that November 10th deadline. So again, extensions may be approved as long as funding is available and the tenants remain eligible. Next slide, please. Utility assistance. So let's talk about utility assistance. Once again, no new applications for rental or utility assistance can be accepted after November 10th deadline. So it's not just the rent, it's utilities. After the 10th, no new applications for that. So if an applicant has received ERAP funding prior to applying for utility assistance can be approved as long as the applicant remains eligible and funding is available. Next slide, please. Okay, landlords. This is something we need to talk about too, about a matching application. So let's say an applicant, okay, if a tenant applies for rental assistance on or before November 10th, the landlord will have 10 days from the date of submission to submit a matching application. So let's say we have a tenant applies for assistance on November 9th. The landlord is going to have till November 19th to be able to submit a matching application. If an application is, I already went through an example. We don't have to go through that one. The time frame's a little bit different, but basically, as long as a renter tenant gets their application in prior to the 10th, we're going to give landlords 10 days. So you'll still have that. Next slide, please. All right, those are the changes that the ERAP program is looking at doing to slow down our spending and to make sure we can meet the needs of what we have currently going on, our current applicants. So we wanted to take an opportunity today is to once again remind people how to avoid payment delays. As we discussed earlier, right now it is taking 40 days for approval. So we continue to work on that time frame. We'd like to see it a few days earlier, maybe more. But here are some things you can do that may speed up the process or not delay. And those following things are: all correspondence will come from Norplay WYO ERAP at wyo.gov. So when you check your email, look for that address. And if you see an email from that address, you look at it and respond as required. You would want to add your mobile phone number to an application. What that does is the system text applicants updates, so you get that right on your phone. Also, you may get a phone call from ERAP. So respond to those phone calls, and all phone calls will come from the following number. It is that 877-996-3727 number that will come up on your phone call, on your phone. It isn't spam. So if you see the number, answer, or that will speed up the process. And then also utilize your local assistance. Utilize community-based organizations to assist with ERAP applications. That is what they're there for. We have them set up. They are trained and they can help you fill out that application. Upload and label all required documents. So in the ERAP application process, there are documents that are required. By labeling them, it is going to help the case management and approval team read those documents and identify what you have submitted for eligibility. So those tips will help speed up the process and or not delay the process. So once again, the length of time it takes for applications to be approved can be up to 40 days. We will contact you if there's an issue with your application. The ERAP team will reach out to you. That ERAP team is usually an individual from Deloitte. Check your email, text messages, phone, and respond to email and phone messages as quickly as possible. And also too, the call center does not know how much longer the review process can take on each application. So what we see a little bit is it's the 39th day, the 40th day. The call center gets many messages about, where's my application? What is the review process? They may be able to go and look in the notes, but they're not going to be able to give you a time frame. So bear with us on that 40 days, and we're trying to, speed up that process. Next slide, please. Okay, we wanted to talk about continued assistance at the community level. So the ERAP, we're making changes to ERAP. We're slowing down our spending, and we're making the changes about no new applications being submitted after November 10th. But the ERAP contracts for housing stability services and legal aid are still going to be in effect through June 30th, 2023. Our community-based organizations that have the housing stability service dollars, they're under contract. Those funds will be available through June 30th, 2023. The funding is not going to be impacted. So, as I mentioned, community-based organizations, that is the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, the Wyoming Department of Health, the Aging Division,
How may I help you?
and Legal Aid of Wyoming. So those services,
Diana, can I call you back? I'm in the middle of
those services
a
are
meeting
going
right now.
to be available.
All right, thank you.
So next slide, please. So what this looks like, what these changes are doing is we're winding down the program. Wyoming still may be eligible to receive additional federal funds. However, we're not really going to know that till possibly early next year. You know, we're predicting we will not get any additional funds, but we may. And if we do, we will communicate out to the state of Wyoming what the fund amount is and what the usage is going to be. But at this time, we really don't know. So we are taking proactive steps to slow down the rate of spending so we can assess the best use of the remaining funds and fulfill our current obligations. If awarded, if is the big if, the program will reevaluate the current rental related needs and determine the best use of those dollars within the federal program guidelines. So this ERAP team is constantly reviewing our spending and looking at ways that we can help the state of Wyoming. We're under constant review. We pay close attention to that. Next slide, please. Here are some other resources that we would like to give you. Wyoming 211, fantastic resource. Simply by dialing 211 or searching the website, people connect to help when they need it. They have a resource list per community. They have caseworkers. They'll take your call and they will assist you and direct you to the needs that you need. And also, it's that time of year again where we have the ERAP program has opened and they are accepting applications. That's the Low Income Energy Assistance Program. What that does, it helps low and fixed income families and individuals pay their heating bills during the winter months. And if you want to learn more and on how to apply, we have an online portal that we're recommending everybody use. Go to the website that is leapwyo.org. Two great resources right there to help our families of Wyoming. Next slide, please. Okay, so assistance with ERAP, you need some help. Landlords, we have an email that we have set up. So questions and concerns with specific cases, there's the email for landlords that they can get their questions answered. It's specifically for landlords. When you do email them, make sure that you include the tenant and the landlord case numbers. That speeds up the response time. Local assistance, DFS is contracted with many community-based organizations, how we just talked about. And please visit our website, which will list those. And that's that dfswyo.gov/ERAP. Great resource. It's there for you. Take a look. And of course, we do have our call center. So for ERAP support, our call center hours are from 9 in the morning till 6 p.m., Monday through Friday, and we have a toll-free number. So that toll-free number is 877-996-3727. So there are some resources to help you get your questions answered with your ERAP application and questions. Next slide, please. Okay, with that said, that concludes our discussion on the changes the ERAP program are going to be making into effect. So it looks like we have a lot of questions in our chat, so we can get started with them. And so I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to read it aloud and we will respond. So the first is the up to 40 days for application processing you mentioned actually days or business days? it is 40 business days. We don't operate on the weekends there that way. That's why it's business days. Let's see. What if the tenant signs a new lease with new rental rates? Are those considered extensions? And what is the timeline and the process? So if a tenant signs a new lease with new rental rates, but the address has not changed, same residence, just new lease, that is not considered a new application and can be considered as an extension, and the timeline is the same. It is taking up to 40 days to get applications approved.
And Carla, just to add on that for everybody's benefit, you have to include the new lease on the extension. So if something changes, they have to upload that document. Otherwise, that will not be changed and the previous amount will be what is correctly paid. So if you're trying to change an amount, that lease needs to be included so our reviewers can look over, make sure that is correct. And then the tenant would need to request the corrected amounts and it'll go through that approval process.
Thank you, Ashley. Any questions on that? Okay. The next one. My understanding was ERAP was COVID funding. Why would people apply now, prior to November 10th, for the need for rental assistance? I certainly do not mean to be critical of the program, looking for clarification on the continuation and extensions of ERAP. We would want anybody to apply that is to apply to get ERAP assistance. Once they are in the system, and if they're eligible and funding's available, they can continue to receive assistance up to 18 months. That doesn't mean we'll have money that may last them the 18 months, but we want people to get their application in and at least get a little bit of assistance compared to none if they qualify. Did that make sense to everybody? We just want people to apply and get their funds in.
Also, I think part of that confusion is it started with ERAP 1. We're currently in ERAP 2. ERAP 2 funding has a little bit more leniency with where the funds go and who they can assist. It was only COVID related to start, and then they transitioned when they realized that some people didn't have a direct COVID correlation, but COVID did affect them and cause a housing instability. And so currently housing instability is that determining factor. Have you experienced housing instability since March 13th of 2020?
Okay. Okay, our next question here is, okay, I have a tenant that was eligible to have the security deposit paid based on his LOI. He did the application himself, and we have never received payment for the security deposit. How can I go about getting that?
So this is kind of an interesting one to kind of give you guys an answer. So applicants is like when they apply, what they request is what we pay. So this applicant probably forgot to put in their security deposit. You can have them do that, but they're going to have to include some kind of documentation that explains, I forgot to ask for my security deposit. What I'm asking for isn't a month that was already paid, it's the deposit for that month. And my landlord has not received that from me yet. And then they can request that. And then the reviewer should see that document stating that explanation. And so let's say they look and they see we've already paid July, they're not going to go deny. They're going to go, oh, this is the deposit. Let's go ahead and mark that through and label that as such. So then they know the difference. So it doesn't look like we're duplicately paying a month.
We
So
already tried that. I uploaded his lease document. I helped him with it with an explanation stating it had never been paid. But nobody pays attention to it. They just keep processing his rental extensions.
Okay, so I need you to email the landlord email with the direct case number and these documents and an explanation of the issue you're having. We'll look over it and see if there's something going on that makes it look like maybe he did request it, and maybe somehow that is being counted and so they can't pay that. So we're going to have to look at that, and it might be it was put to the wrong month. So maybe you got it and instead of an explanation, you put it towards the next month, and that's where we have to figure that out. So just send that to the ERAP-landlord email, and they'll get that taken care of for you. And then most of us see those when they come through, but we'll keep an eye for that specific one from you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there a contact point if we are working with tenants who are facing eviction, have eviction notices, and the application is completed? So I guess I would need to know, Caitlin, with that. So when you ask if there's a point of contact for the application assistance or for a CBO, what could you help clarify that question for me?
Yes, thank you. Sorry for being confusing there. So our program is working with a family who has completed the application before they got the eviction notice, and now they have an eviction notice, it's whatever the 40 days is, which is totally fine. But now they're facing homelessness. And so we didn't know if there was something that we could do to get them a point of contact that could maybe fast track something, or could give them advice or notifications or something to send to their landlord saying, we are in this process, this is where the application is, to kind of help maybe them not end up in a homeless situation. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. Tino, did you want to talk a little bit about what your CBOs could possibly offer with that?
Yes, so they could contact one of the local CBOs and there might be some resources available there. They also could contact legal aid. We have provided legal aid. We have a contract with legal aid to help alleviate some of those particular issues. I also would wonder if the application is still in process, or we'd want to have a better timeline of when the applicant had actually applied, so we knew what the timeline looked like there. So possibly contacting the ERAP CBO email as well. So I would suggest reaching out first to the local CBO, and then also maybe to legal aid, depending on what the time frame is there. Ashley?
Also with that, if you guys do get a eviction notice, that's something that we do need. So I would say with going through your CBO, you need the application assistance location, you want to be sure you give them that notice, or you upload that notice, because that is usually what kind of tries to fast track those who have eviction notices. We try to push through a little faster. There's not a guarantee that we can get them through faster than 40 days, but that is usually the sign that we try to start getting them through. So you're going to go through the application assistance and upload that document. The call center also should be able to escalate that. So you tell them, I have an eviction notice. I need to talk to a case manager. I need to get this uploaded to my case. They should have somebody contact you within a certain amount of time to work on that processing.
Okay. If someone has an LOI, it will be in effect and they can still apply after November 10th, just clarifying. Okay, so with this one, so if someone currently has an LOI right now, they've met the November 10th deadline. So that LOI is going to remain in effect until they can establish residency or until their 90 days is up. So if an individual has not found housing by the expiration of 90 days, the LOI will no longer be valid. And let's add something else. If they apply before the 10th, they get that LOI, they'll be eligible for 90 days. And if somebody already has an LOI, let's say they're at the 30-day mark, that's going to stay in effect until the 90 days or no funding is available. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Our local RFC is telling residents who go through them for assistance with ERAP not to pay us. How do we go about fixing this since residents are still responsible for their rent until we receive an approval? Our local is resident. The way the ERAP application process is set up is once an application is filled out by a tenant, the landlord is going to get notification and they'll have 10 days to go in there and do a match. What that does is that will make payment go directly to the landlord and not to the tenant. If the tenant doesn't go in and do a matching application for some reason, the money is flipped to the tenant. And if you have instances where you know your tenant is getting money and not using it on rent, that is something that we would need to be aware of. And that's something that we could discuss outside of this meeting and could definitely be reported. And as far as your local RFC, if we need to talk with one of them and get clarification on if that indeed is the case, they're saying not to pay landlords, that's something else, I'd be happy to meet with you and talk to you about that. Please reach out to me and we can talk about that.
Also, with the caveat to that, ERAP doesn't reimburse. So let's say they've asked for 3 months forward and that's November, December, January. And let's say they are late. Let's say they put it in today and they're late on the 3rd and you guys are trying to get your payment. If you don't want to wait, they are not supposed to pay you for something they've requested. So if they requested these months, they shouldn't be prepaying you because then you would have to send that money back to the program. You can't give it to the tenant. You can't keep it. You can't use it for future months. You have to send it back and then they have to apply and be determined eligible for more assistance money. So that's where we get into that issue with that. And so it's not wrong that they're not supposed to pay if they've requested it on their ERAP, but we can also change those months before it's been approved. So if absolutely they need to pay and they can pay or something and you work something out and they do, they need to call the call center or you guys need to reach out to the ERAP landlord and let them know, hey, they requested this month, and this month. They've paid me for this month. Can we alter it to be the next few months or whatever we could do to change it? If it's too close to that window of changing it to 3 months forward, it might cut one off and then they'd only be paid for 2 more months in advance until their next extension. Just know that it can't be reimbursement. So they can't use it as reimbursement. You can't use it as reimbursement and you can't apply it where it has not been told to be applied. So you guys as a landlord would get a email, even if you didn't participate, as long as the email is in there that says, we've paid November, December, January. Please apply it to these months. So you got to make sure you're kind of being careful with that because that's where you run into being non-compliant with the program.
So this was my question, so I'm just going to hop on really quick. So you guys are saying that the residents are not legally required to still pay their rent until we receive an approval, but you're taking a month and a half, almost 2 months, to give us any kind of an approval. So how exactly is that justified when rent is still due on the 1st? And we're also being told that we're not supposed to be, evicting these residents if they're not paying us anything, but you guys are taking 2 months to give us an approval.
Unfortunately, this is kind of a federal guideline rather than a guideline that we implemented. So it's just us following the rules that we were given to even apply this assistance to anybody. We understand that, and that's why we try to be open. That's something where you can send an email to the ERAP landlord. If they've previously been deemed eligible, a lot of times nothing has changed. It's just income eligibility that we're checking. So kind of keep that in mind. And like I said, we're willing to change it to those months. So if something happens, but a lot of times these people who are applying for ERAP can't pay their rent. If they gave a partial payment or something, we can change those amounts, but we're under the assumption that they're unable to pay. And so that wait time is just as fast. We have so many applications coming in that this is as quick as we can get through them. We're having about, I think the last average I got was about 230 applications a day. We're expecting that hopefully will slow down a little bit once this change is implemented. But right now we're getting extensions, applications, LOIs, and it's all adding up to about 250 a day, including weekends. And so at that point, that's how long it takes just to get through those, because we have to look at every document. We have to approve that. We have to check eligibility. Like Wyoming took a stance to try to stop fraudulent activity. So we take extra care when we're checking our applications and our applicants. And so that's just kind of where we've fallen. This is the furthest we've been back, but we are slowly gaining time. It was above 40 days and we're cutting back down. So we're hoping to see that continuously down.
And I think we expect those case aging times to come down a little after the 10th, once we're no longer receiving new applications and they're only working extensions. So I'm hoping, I think we're hopeful that those case aging times will come down.
Okay. Next question here is, as funds start to run out, will you contact landlords and let them know extensions might be declined? We have not completely mapped out the messaging yet, but yes, you will get messages as long as you have a matching application. We've got your information. You're going to know if your client was denied or approved. So as we get going and slowing down the money, the messaging, we will make the messaging very clear as that goes along. Probably, I don't know, once these change starts happening, probably mid-December, end of December, we're going to be able to really take a look at where we're at with our funding, and we will get some messaging mapped out. But rest assured, there will be messaging if your client is denied. Okay, if a letter of intent is expiring on 11/11 and they have not found housing by then, are they ineligible at that point? Yes, they are. Now, let's talk about that. They applied, they got it before the 10th cutoff, but the 90 days expired on the 11th. They have not secured housing, so their LOI would expire and they could not apply. It would not be a new application. Okay, moving on. Okay, what are the conditions for continued federal funding in 2023? And where does the uncertainty lie for DFS? I would ask for clarification, Andrew, on this one. Are you specifically talking about ERAP on this one?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you're talking about the possibility of more funds going into next year. So I was just wondering if there was anything, that would be conditions for receiving or not receiving funds, and just why you're not expecting funds to come.
Well, I got to tell you, at this point, we do not know if we're going to get additional funds or not. And additional funds is based on expenditures, how much the state of Wyoming is spending. And there are formulas and amounts that have to be spent in order to receive additional funding. So US Treasury is a little bit behind in the amounts that they're going to take back if you do not meet your spending ratio. For quarter 2, Wyoming did not meet their expenditure ratio, or quarter 2. We did make it in quarter 3, so we were allowed to request additional funding, and we got that. That is that second tranche of funds we've got. But what we're waiting on is, because we did not meet the expenditure ratio in quarter 2, they may be clawing back some money. We just don't know how much at this time. So it's up in the air if we're going to get additional money or not. I think we'll have a better picture at the first of the year of what that's going to look like. Right now in our predictions, we don't know. It looks like we're not going to get any money, but if it may happen, and as we talked about earlier in the slide presentation, if we do get additional funds, we will make sure you're very aware of that and what we're going to do with the funding, how we're going to spend that. Okay, Andrew? So really, it's hard because we just don't have a lot of the questions answered. We're waiting on US Treasury for a lot of that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yes. Okay. Okay. If ERAP pays the security deposit for the tenant, who gets the security deposit at time of move out? ERAP or the tenant? Ashley, would you like to take this one?
So that one's not a black and white answer. A lot of times we allow the deposit to be utilized in the correct way. We do not use the deposit to pay rents that have been unpaid. So if that person moves out and doesn't pay the next month's rent, that is not what that deposit can be used for, because they would have to be deemed eligible for, like, let's say they move out July, they can't pay August with the deposit because they were not deemed eligible for August. But if it's something like, it depends what kind of things you're trying to keep it for. It's one of those bases. That deposit is the deposit, so we're okay with using it. If some of it has to go for certain things, that's okay for the landlord. If the applicant has lived there for more than 4 months, deposits don't go to the applicant if they haven't lived there for a minimum of 4 months. So if they move in and then they move back out, that's not what that's for. They can't just claim the deposit. So it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. We don't just allow $400 to go to a cleaning fee. Like, we can't use the whole deposit to pay for damages that are underneath that amount or something. Like, we can't stretch it further than those, if that makes sense. Like, it has to be under a certain rules, and we try to go off of what the lease states, but sometimes that also isn't manageable for the program. But you don't just give your deposit back to the tenant just because they moved out. It kind of, that's like the case by case, just like a deposit for you guys in general.
So how do we go about getting confirmation on what we can charge and what we can't charge? What is supposed to be refunded to the tenant? What's supposed to be refunded to you? That's a whole nother follow.
ERAP landlord can handle that email. If you send it to there, if they have any questions or concerns, we would get it, but that's what that's for. The ERAP-landlord email is strictly for landlord questions pertaining to that. So anything landlord related, that email should be able to answer. There's actual people working behind it who can specifically look at your case and let you know, and you can give them the details. Because when you guys send funds back to us, we ask for a ledger of what you've kept and what you haven't kept and why you're sending it back. And then we go through and make sure it matches our process. And then if it does not, we will get in contact with you guys and let you know you owe more, you owe less, things of that nature.
Okay. Okay, we have time for a few more questions here. If a new application is submitted before 11/10, but then gets kicked back for more information, is this still considered a new application? So if the individual applies and meets that deadline and additional information is required or some follow-up questions, they're still, that applicant, they met the deadline. That's not going to discontinue their application, or if you have to provide new information, or not new, but additional, that doesn't mean you cancel out your application. That's just the regular follow-up and checking for eligibility. So no, that won't be. Let's see. I'd like to answer your question, Karen. And if the tenant is not eligible for a security deposit due to damages, can the security deposit be used to cover those damage fees? I think, Ashley, you covered that. Do you have any additional comments you want to make on that?
No, I think that, like I said, you just can't, like, we don't pay just random cleaning fees, like, or it just kind of depends what you're looking at. Like if it's not in the lease and then it's just some random thing you've added because they've done something else, that probably won't be something that ERAP can cover.
Okay. All right. Next question here. Can you apply for an extension on an LOI? Some of our potential applicants are on a waiting list longer than 90 days. This is unfortunate. So the LOIs that expire at 90 days and they haven't received housing, they do expire. If the 90 days expire before the 10th, they can apply for a new LOI. But if it's after the 10th, you can no longer apply for an LOI.
I couldn't find my unmute button, sorry. So I do have a question regarding a landlord-tenant issue, and I think you kind of touched base on this prior, but I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. So I had a landlord who specifically asked the tenant, which they're not supposed to do, to make a payment on their rent. So the tenant did so, which then, of course, the ERAP check comes in and it's covering for a month that the tenant had already paid for. So the agreement between the tenant and the landlord is this is going to carry forward to the month that the next following. The tenant decides that she is moving out due to some damages in the home. So she was let go of her obligations in the lease. This particular landlord is now saying she does not owe funds back to ERAP or to the tenant because ERAP paid out for October, but that person actually had already paid an extra month. So there is a month of money sitting there. What do I tell the landlord who's asking, why do I have to pay back money when it was technically ERAP paid for October? But then I have a tenant who's telling me, no, I paid a month during that time of wait. So we're actually paid out for November, even though I moved out.
So please remember that ERAP applicants get free legal counsel through legal aid. Okay. I would say take it to legal aid, because the problem with that is the tenant would need to prove that they paid the landlord. So I would need some kind of proof for that. If they can prove that, that can be something that you let a CBO, applicant assistance program, know. They can get that information to us, that proof to us, and we can look over that. And at that point, we can determine that, because you guys can't internally decide who's keeping what money for what. Again, ERAP can't be used for reimbursements, and you can't determine eligibility without using the ERAP program portal. So if that person was overpaid, that landlord had already attested in the agreements, it says overpayments will be sent back. So that overpayment should have immediately been sent back, and that is already something that's sitting out of compliance if it was prepaid.
Okay.
If it's owed, again, like I said, they can go through the legal aid and they can get the assistance for more help that way, because it's kind of one of those he said, she said things unless there's proof. So you'd have to prove that that was prepaid somehow. I'm not really sure how, but you do the proof, you upload that. If you do feel there's something more suspect going on, the ERAP website does have a I need to report option, and it says report for ERAP. And you can report tenants and landlords alike. It's not one or the other. You can report any situation, and that then goes to the compliance team to review compliance. And then there's outreach and all kinds of things that go through that. But if you're having a legal issue, I suggest contacting legal aid to step in and try to help. They basically just need a case number, the applicant information, and then they'll ask you for more information. They can let you know what they can do to help. And if they're concerned, they can, again, reach out to the ERAP team, and we can work on that. But the biggest thing is going to be, if that applicant paid, for one, they shouldn't have paid, because that is also part of their agreement. It says, I will not pay what I'm already requesting, because I will not take a duplicate payment. And so it's kind of one of those things, it's like both parties are slightly out of compliance. And so we can't just force one. We have to make sure we get both in compliance. So you can't internally agree with your tenant. You can't internally agree with your landlord. Oh yeah, I paid you for this. Push it through to January, because that we don't know about that, right? The ERAP
Right.
program won't be able to track that. And so let's say that comes down, and that is something that is caught later, because everybody who applies through ERAP agrees to a potential audit. So that is something that would come up and be foreseen as out of compliance. So you guys
Okay.
got to kind of think of it that way. But if you are having this issue, legal aid is there to help settle between both. Just like our county-based organizations, they should be helping with that settlement also. They're allowed to help landlords as well understand the program. They can be the mediators between the two. Because I know when we get into that situation, when it gets nasty, they can help with that. You know, we're not here just to help tenants. We're not here just to help landlords. We're here to help everybody and try to make everybody happy at the end of the day. But again, we have to follow the federal rules. So if we say you owe this money back, you don't get to argue. Like, that's just the federal government has decided that, and that's what we have to collect back.
Okay. So should I at least advise on like the landlord who is asking, do I need to return these funds, when she's technically, I mean, it's complicated. Do I just need to advise her to also contact legal aid if that is an issue between her and the tenant then?
She could contact ERAP landlord if she's that concerned.
Okay.
But, you know, if you have conversations between that, I would say send those in as well. Maybe just keep that in and just have everybody be, I mean, at that point, that's kind of one of those roundabout situations. I'd say, you know, maybe send it all in pertaining, because we don't want to not help the landlord. We don't want to not help the tenant, but we also have to come to an agreement that something incorrect was done and we need to correct that situation.
Okay.
So they would help if it gets something further. Like I said, legal aid's for the applicant, but they do mediation as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you answering my question.
So Lori, you're checking to see, as a landlord, if you have a matching case, if you can check the status. You should, if you've matched with your applicant, you should be able to see a status bar that actually moves with the application. So it'll move when they go from initial review to their final review. And then if it's approved, it'll go to payment, and then you'll get an email or a text update, depending what you've signed up for, that states when the payment has been sent. All right. Jessica, if they're currently receiving ERAP but are moving to our site, it is considered a new application and they must apply prior to the deadline. Yes, so if they have a previous existing application, but it's at a different address, they would need a new application. So if they wanted to do that after November 10th, they wouldn't be able to. Good news, they can start their application now. So if you have a lease or you're starting a lease, they can start it before the deadline and get that in, and that should beat that deadline issue. If you have any other questions on that, let me know. Christine, you're saying that you have a LOI for a new applicant and it has recently ran out due to a lack of housing in Platte County. Do I need to do an application? So is the LOI for you or your applicant? So if they have an LOI, they're good for 90 days. If the 90-day limit has ran out, they need to extend that letter of intent. They should just be able to go in there and select extend and then sign up for an extension. Usually takes about 2 weeks, but as soon as they push that extend, that would count as that new application going in before the 10th. And then they'd have 90 days for housing. All right, Liz, you're asking when they can file for an extension. So that depends on how they were paid. Let's give an example. Let's say they were paid November, December, January. So that was their 3-month forward extension. They would want to apply for their extension January 1st. Because we have a waiting time of about 40 days, that's going to be the soonest they can apply for an extension to try to avoid the late time and the late payments. We're hoping with this change of process by mid-December, our wait times will go down from 40 back to the 30 is what we're aiming for. We've kind of stayed consistently with that. We've gone slightly over, and with the new influx of applications, we've gone behind a little further than normal. We're seeing about 240 a day, I think right now is the average. So that's kind of what's slowing that approval process down.
All right. Well, that sums up our meeting for today. We want to thank everybody for attending today. And please, if you have some unanswered questions, there are the resources we talked about. You could visit the dfswyo.gov ERAP website. And also we provided landlord emails. You've got your local assistance and your call center. So thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your time. Thank you.